Welcome to our full council on Tuesday, the 12th of February. I'd like to welcome members of the press, Clive, and members of the public, Mark, and especially Stephen Taylor today, who is just been appointed our Deputy Monitoring Officer. So welcome to you, Stephen. So item 1 on our agenda, please, any declarations of interest? Councillor Legg.
Thank you. A disclosable pecuniary interest in item 13 as my father-in-law rents a garage.
Thank you. No further declarations. So item 2, to confirm as a correct record the minutes of the meeting of the Council of the Isles of Scilly held on the 15th of January 2019. Councillor Grottick.
Thank you, Chair. It's on page 7, the second paragraph down. It was my comment, so obviously it's she agreed, please, but actually I didn't agree with all views expressed because there was a divergence of opinion. Notable views expressed. I did note the challenges regarding certain gambling policies and then asked that careful consideration of the merits of it could be commenced. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I, if there's no other comments, could I have a proposer, please, for the confirmation of the minutes? Councillor Mumford, seconded Councillor Watt. All those in favour? Thank you. So item 3 on the agenda, I have no chairman's announcements. Item 4 on the agenda, I have no questions under Standing Order 14. Item 5 on the agenda is to consider reports from committees, including the receipt of minutes of draft minutes for information, page 9 to 18. No comments?
Do you want to propose her?
Yes, please.
I'll propose that.
Councillor Mumford proposing a seconder, please. All those in favour? Thank you. Item 6 on the agenda to consider motions in accordance with Standing Order 12. I have none. Item 7 on the agenda is member updates, page 19. Councillor Mumford.
Thank you. I regret being unable to attend the special meeting on the 22nd of January and have had an opportunity to reflect on Council's decision and the departure of the Chief Executive. I have prepared a personal perspective on the Chief Executive's time on the islands and what a possible positive influence I found it to be, and would like this recorded verbatim in the public record. During Teo's time as Chief Executive, we have all achieved an awful lot.
No, excuse me, Councillor Mumford, our monitoring officer would like to say a word.
It's difficult to advise, Chairman, without knowing what's going to be said. So it would be useful if that could be shared before the meeting, okay, or if we could have a look at it and then decide whether or not it's appropriate after. So if perhaps you could share that with the Chairman and myself.
So do you not want me to continue?
Not at this stage.
Is it illegal?
It depends what's going to be said, Chair.
We had
because
some
things which have to be considered in private. If it mentions.
Could I ask the members if I could continue?
I'm sorry, Chairman.
Could I ask the members if I can continue?
Well, without knowing what's going to be said, Chairman, it's difficult to give a ruling on that because there are some things which should only be considered in the absence of the press and public.
Can we defer it till the next full council?
I would rather say it now. There's nothing in here that is going to cause a problem.
Well, as I said, can we share it and perhaps take this at a later part of the agenda then, Chairman? Once it's been seen and perhaps adjourned for 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay. Who do I give it to see?
Okay.
The Chairman?
That's an appropriate point, yes?
Yes, thank you.
So,
Yes. Yeah. Can we have any other member updates, please, for the moment? Councillor Marcus.
I've got a question about the member update. Shall I? About some of them, if that's all right.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the lead member for finance update. Part of the resolution was to ensure that acting up payments are made for staff. I just want to make sure that those acting up payments are across the whole organisation, not just for named individuals, but for everyone who's affected by the current situation.
Thank you.
That's all right. I've got questions about the other updates, but I don't know if any of the lead member wanted to introduce those updates first, or
I'm
Councillor
happy
Williams.
to introduce mine. I don't know what your question will be, but if I cover it, then so much better. I'm assuming members have read my update. I'd been hoping that our Member of Youth Parliament would have been here today. He'd been hoping to be part of the agenda, but had to pull out at the last minute due to school commitments, but he's hoping to be here next time. I know members expressed interest in him attending when we spoke previously. Just as a heads up, his three main areas of concern when I met with him last week were lowering the voting age to 16, a curriculum for life, and knife crime. So if members would like to do any homework on either of those topics, perhaps before next meeting, you might be better prepared. Members are aware that the play park at the Garrison has been closed since September time due to health and safety concerns. The inspection of the site as well as other play sites has now taken place. The report was received back literally 24 hours ago. But in the meantime, there's obviously been some social media interest in the site, particularly from a member of the community who is looking to raise some funds, which I totally welcome. I think it's great that people use social media to develop some positive action and to take a lead on things rather than a lot of the criticism and moaning which we often associate with social media. So I know Mr. Hogan has so far raised about £1,100 for the site at the Garrison. And that's pledges from 47 different individuals, which I think demonstrates the sort of commitment people want to see for play provision on Scilly, and hopefully that will move forward. And if we can get other groups and organisations to help with the fundraising, I'd like to think we can get the play parks in a much better state than they currently are. There's also some positive news about road safety. We know that the site down at Carnguavel is extremely busy at school drop-off and collection time. Members of Academy staff have been overseeing the morning crossing, which I think has been appreciated and has been valued. There's also some funding being put in place by the Community Safety Partnership to support with some support in the afternoon. But again, as I put in my report, I think there's a degree of self-policing which can be implemented into the whole process, so people are parking responsibly and behaving responsibly in the area at school drop-off time. And I'm hoping to be able to provide some further information on the situation regarding the nursery class at our next meeting. There were expressions of interest received, but it's a bit too early at this stage to talk publicly about how that's panning out. But I think it's moving in a positive direction, so hopefully we'll have some positive news in due course. I think that's pretty much all from me, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Marcus.
So regarding the access to CAMS and Senko arrangements, are there any updates? Is there any way that the council can get involved in that and help resolve the issues from the public around those?
The appointment of a Senko is a school responsibility, and we can feed that in our strategic meetings, but that's their appointment. And then on CAMS, we work regularly with CAMS, and we're having conversations about how we can put technology in place to support some of the missed appointments. That was from a specific forum. We also are having quite positive feedback on the improvement of emotional wellbeing services on the islands too, so it's just balancing that out.
Thank you, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's good to read various things in this report from Councillor Williams. I think just regarding the Garrison Play Park, I agree it's great to have the support from the community. I think we as a council need to think quite carefully about these assets going forward. We've had a bit of a conversation about this, and but I think it can be viewed in a very positive light in terms of some buy-in from the community, because assets can also be liabilities, can't they? We need to be quite aware of that. I was just also going to ask, just regarding this issue around the traffic at St Mary's, sorry, down by the school there, because this was raised before around the school travel policy. Can you just comment on sort of where we are with that?
There is a school travel group in place, which has got parent representatives who put themselves forward, our health and safety officer, school and so on, who have got a whole travel study in place. And I think the school's been communicating with parents about early indications of what's going to happen as a result.
And also there was the issue around down where the nursery is at Carnquarvlas.
That's all the access to school stuff is dealt with by that school travel group.
Okay.
Michael Coates is the chairman, if you wanted to catch up with him.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Watt.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just a point about the road safety aspect outside Carnquarvlas. My understanding is, I've seen several comments actually and heard them as well, that sleeping policemen might be a good solution. But unfortunately, my understanding is it's an A road and you can't put sleeping policemen on A roads.
I think there are all sorts of ideas around zebra crossing, which would be an informal zebra crossing. There's all sorts of ideas, and that's why there's a travel group established, and they can work with the police. And because obviously things like speed limits and slowing down, that's also, there needs to be a degree of enforcement. So there's a big discussion about what can be done, but you know, everything's a possibility.
Thank you. Councillor Barclay.
Chairman, could I ask that if this school travel group includes discussion on the boating between Tresco and Briar, or Briar and Tresco?
I can ask for that to be discussed.
Thank you. It's just that I'd like to point out yet again that our children have been missing up to 20% of schooling this winter because of the failure of the boating service.
Thank you. Councillor Sims.
I just wanted a quick comment on the lead member for finance update report. It's just the last italic sentence there. Any costs associated with the recent decision around the chief executive will not impact on the budget of jobs, as they will be funded from the reserves. I think possibly there's a typo in that line, but it just seems a little bit, given how much we've been struggling to maintain reserves and keep them up at around the $1 million mark over the last few years. It just seems a little bit, I just think that sentence seems a little bit glib, given how we've been battling to keep this all going. And I mean, reserves are important and we need to maintain them. And it just struck me as almost a throwaway sentence. Regarding my update, which is quite long this time, I just wanted to actually physically thank Nicola, Mike, Sandy and Teo for getting us out of this, what was a terrible hole with the Food Standards Agency. They've done a really, really good job. And I think overall outside, I think vast improvement in the places that actually have to go through the FSA inspections and everything. So basically well done to everybody. And I'm sure anybody has any questions on my update regarding finance, I think it'd be best to lead them into the correct part of the meeting. And also, if we can get Avril's statement at some point during this meeting, it would be much appreciated. I think it's important because as time goes on, it becomes perhaps less pertinent.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thank you. Could I just ask the lead member for place just a couple of questions? One was related to environmental health. When we had a public meeting here a few months ago, one of the individuals spoke about the fact he'd spoken with the environmental health officer about dog mess. And he thought there was some positive news in the pipeline, but it doesn't seem to have come out of the pipeline yet. So I was just wondering if there was any news on that. And I was also approached by members of Theatre Club yesterday regarding the ongoing inability to use the town hall. So I was wondering if we could perhaps, through the lead member for place, organise a meeting with perhaps interested members staff and theatre club to once and for all try and find out what the barriers are stopping the town hall stage from being used for the likes of pantomimes and other public performances?
Well, essentially, it's a health and safety issue. I have my own personal opinions on it, which I probably not going to put out here, but it seems to be quite an intractable problem, and I think there are sort of issues on both sides with moving it forward, but I can't really say much more about that because well, it's too complicated to do at this point, but there is, I think there will be trying to move this thing forward will continue, and hopefully we'll get some resolution on this. As regarding dog mess, I think essentially it's still in the pipeline.
Thank you. Councillor Grottin.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to comment with regard to the comment made about the lead member for finance report. It was actually a report that I thought would be useful to copy. It was actually our 151 officer's report, and I copied it with his permission. So therefore, might I suggest you either address and ask the 151 officer to respond to your query in public now, or you have a private conversation with him at some mutually convenient time. There's a slight type error in that last sentence, by the way. It will not impact on the budget or jobs as they will be funded from reserves. Thank you.
Well, principally my issue on that was we are all, as members, very, very aware of the reserve situation and how we have to protect reserves. I just thought dealt with in that one sentence there was, I had an issue with it, that's all. I don't really wish to talk to the Chief Finance Officer about that particularly, unless you would like to say something.
I'll just come in briefly there, Chair, if you don't mind. As part of doing the 1920 budget, we've done a review of reserves, and there are a number of reserves that have been identified that will be transferred to the general fund reserve, which will boost the balance, meaning that these costs can be met from that reserve without being detrimental and dropping below the £1 million level that we've set. You'll see the details of that in the next full council meeting when we bring the full budget papers.
Oh,
Councillor Sims.
Essentially, yeah, I accept what you're saying, but however, there's still opportunity costs with anything. If you spent it on something, you haven't got it for something else.
Thank you. Councillor Mumford.
Just going back to the lead member for Children and Young People's report, could I ask Aisling, please, if there is any news on the early years building down there? Have we managed to get anybody to take it on?
I think Councillor Williams referred to the fact that we do have a potential provider, but it's far too early to confirm that in public because of commercial sensitivity.
Okay, thank you. And secondly, I actually spoke to Julian Pearce yesterday about the theatre club. And I actually spent about an hour with him because I came in completely new to all that was going on. And as far as I can make out, it's really up to the theatre club now to be in contact with the council to let them know what they want. And that is the next stage, I believe.
Thank you. Councillor Mumford, do you want to continue with your earlier report?
Yes, please. Thank you. I won't start right at the beginning again. So, during Teo's time as Chief Executive, we have all achieved an awful lot, including the removal of the structural deficit. Despite members' savings, commitments in the past 3 years totaling 1.4 million. With Teo's leadership and guidance, we have been able to protect our adult social services budget, and for the most part, that of children's services. The airport was previously placed in special measures, but no longer. Park House faced closure, but a solution was found. Concessionary boating fares are retained for eligible residents on the off-islands, as well as boating costs for children to access services on St Mary's. Park House is now transformed and was the winner of Outstanding Residential or Nursing Home Care Team of the Year at the Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Care and Support Awards. The waste site redevelopment has seen a massive change from the removal of a dangerous incinerator and the eyesore of the Morwell Alp to having a purpose-built facility and improved recycling. Thanks are due to senior officers, staff, past and present, who helped make these things happen after a major reshaping exercise. It is important for us to make sure we are honest and open in where we can improve and communicate this. This was fundamental to my own discussions with Teo, and it is essential that the Council is seen as a trusted organisation by the public and others. Teo has put in place improved reporting to support our decision-making and make sure our published reports are comprehensible to the public. Alongside this assurance, he has supported the independence of a democratic and corporate service to provide constructive support and challenge to members and officers. A major focus has been improving water and sewerage, and the progress is hugely encouraging with the appointment of an Isles of Scilly water manager from South West Water. The Smart Islands programme has put the islands on the map, being featured in the government's business strategy, and we are working with a globally respected partner in Hitachi and supporting full-time, year-round jobs on the islands. Also, we have demonstrated benefits of collaboration with Cornwall Council while retaining our independence and sovereignty, and we are working towards a landmark health and care integration project. Teo negotiated 1.8 million with the Minister of State for Transport for the roads renewal project. Finally, as members, we represent the community, and that informs the strategic vision in our corporate plan that we require officers to deliver. A new corporate plan and local plan are in development. With changes at the top, it is vital that we recognise and support all the Council's workforce during this period of transition, with a special mention for Craig as Acting Chief Executive. Teo, like all of us, is human, and I am reminded that perfection is not this side of heaven. In his time here, he has left the Council in a far better place than it was, and I thank him. We all need to continue to build on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mumford. However, I would like to remind members, as I did at our last full council, that we have to stick to the relevance of what we're being asked to talk about. And we're talking about member updates. And Councillor Mumford, you are the chair of scrutiny. We cannot, the members around this table have vastly different views about some of the items which you have talked about. And the items that you have talked about, Councillor Mumford, are not relevant to this agenda item. I do not propose to continue on this subject any further at the moment because we are not debating the rights and wrongs of what was agreed at the last council meeting. However, I would say in the future, if there's any items to be discussed at full council that are not relevant to the agenda items, they need to be put before me first, please. Thank you. Right, we're going to, sorry. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Joe. Just had some questions just on Lee Menford Place report, please. Well, it's just going to emphasise actually regarding the Food Standards Agency audit. You know, I think that is, as you say, an excellent position that we're now in, and you know, referring to the report in section 2 as well, part 2, is very good for the council. I was just also going to say on the water and sewage consultations, the meeting on St Martin's was very well attended. St Agnes and St Martin's are probably in the more challenging situation with water and sewage because of the inheritance of very different systems, but the engagement was really good and public support was good. So I'd like to sort of emphasise that that was a very positive discussion. And just to emphasise also the Ofwat consultation, my understanding is that it's really quite important that members of the public on Scilly do engage in that, because it is important in terms of the investment that South West Water will be making. That was the message that I was understanding, so I'd like to sort of put it out there to everyone to encourage people to get involved in that Ofwat consultation, because it does matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nellams.
Thank you, Chair. As we're on member updates, could I just give a report from the meeting held of the Devon and Cornwall Police and Crime panel that was on Thursday, because there was a fairly important agenda item, which was the preset proposal for 2019-2020 with the budget for medium-term financial plan. The main motion was passed. It does mean a £24 a year addition, £2 a month based on the valuation D housing. It was unanimous with one abstention, and the abstention wasn't against the figure. The abstention was due to the fact that it will hit lower waged families, but it was also against the proposal itself that the government hasn't been putting the money in. If you look at the government grants over the last 5 or 6 years, the money has not kept pace. So, I mean, as an example, the Devon and Cornwall area get 25 pence per person. Many other areas get 33 pence per person. So that's a sort of almost a third sort of missing. And it was also pointed out that the population swells in the summer, most of Devon and Cornwall, by about 30%. So we get a lot of additional people. So it was decided that a letter was going to be sent by the Commissioner, Alison Hernandez, and by the Chairman of the committee, and it's going to government asking for fairer funding, that fairer funding be put in place. So that was the main agenda item. But there was also, following from that, the week before last, we had a really good collaboration event with the 3 services. And after the main meeting in Plymouth, we were invited to Bodmin, basically on the way home, where they made the presentation for 10 officers of the first Tri-Services safety sort of team. They're based all over Cornwall, in Foy, Porth, Perranporth, all sorts of places dotted about. And they're the first in the country as well. So these have been training for 4 years now. And it was really quite a nice event to be at. And after the event here and seeing that there, I think it would be a really good idea if we have one of these officers here. So I don't know whether that's going to be possible or not, but it'd be nice to see. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sims.
Just a little question for Mike. I believe the Devon Cornwall Dorset amalgamation is now off the table, isn't it?
Yeah, that's completely off. It never even reached a vote, basically. I didn't go to that meeting that decided that, but that was taken some while ago, and it's just not going to happen now, at the present time anyway.
Thank you. From the chair, I would like to report that yesterday we had sponsor board, we also had transport board. Clearly the minutes from those meetings are not yet available, so that will be reported fully on at our next full council. I would also like to ask, before we move off member updates, we had a request from Councillor Mumford that her comments would be included in the minutes. I need a proposer and a seconder if that is what members wish.
I'm happy to propose.
Proposed by Councillor Sims.
I will second it.
Seconded by Councillor Smith. All those in favour? All those, any against? Right, that's carried. Thank you. Right, we move on to number 8, urgent items, of which I have one, which will be considered in part 3, as it contains exempt material. Can I please have a proposer to exclude press and the public from part 3. Councillor Marcus, thank you. And seconder, Councillor Sims. All those in favour? Thank you. So that will be considered later in part 3. Right, we move on to item 9 on our agenda, which is the value for money action plan on page 29, report of our 151 officer. Thank you, Russell.
Thank you, Chair. The report set out in front of members was a direct request from the meeting we had in December when the external auditor was here. If you can remember, we had a clean set of accounts for the 2017-18 factual accounts, the statement of accounts, but the external auditor gave us an adverse opinion on the value for money assessment they carried out. If you go to the page 30, second page of the report, I'm not going to read it verbatim, but paragraph 2 sets out what the external auditor said, where they thought there was weaknesses and why they came to that conclusion. They then set out a number of recommendations, which I've put into a table in paragraph 5, and I've extended the actions and put relevant officers as the lead on those actions there. So we have a number of recommendations there. I can go through them one by one, or take it, members have read it, and whether they've got any questions on it. But we now have a documented action plan. You'll see that the lead officer on a number of them is myself, but it's not just a financial issue going forward, which we've mentioned previously. There are other issues to get the value for money opinion positive. Therefore, the chief executive or the acting chief executive or interim chief executive, whoever will be here during the year, will have a number of actions as well, particularly around non-financial actions to satisfy the auditor's recommendations. So we now have got this action plan, as I say, as requested. Any questions?
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Really just a question of, obviously we've read these recommendations from the auditors, and good to see there's an action plan. Is this an action plan that you develop with the auditors? I mean, as in, will they accept the action plan, I guess is my question.
Yeah, the actions were the management responses that we put in, which they accepted at the time. I've expanded those slightly for the action plan, but generally, yes, they will accept them.
So this would satisfy them essentially. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Grottick.
Just a quick comment. Thank you, Russell, for another very clear report. I would just comment that I think we're a little bit ahead of ourselves. On the top of the first page, it comments that Grant Thornton have sent an annual report to full council in December 2019. I think we're a little bit ahead of ourselves.
Thank you. Councillor Sims.
Just clarification, really, because I can imagine people outside of the community, etc., seeing this. I think the council's not value for money, but this value for money is not really like £12 for a bag of spuds, is it? It's a very different thing altogether. Essentially, they cannot be clear that it's value for money. So on that basis, they've got to think it possibly not. But you understand it a little bit more than I do, I think.
It doesn't mean that you're not obtaining value for money for each individual purchase, etc. It's about your overall control environment, both the financial control environment, your corporate governance control environment, and how the council is being run on a regular basis in terms of the monitoring that's in place for financial monitoring, performance management, how you manage your risk assessments, etc. And obviously, how those arrangements, how embedded they are throughout the authority. It's all right bringing the high-level report to members here. Is that actually down in the grassroots of the authority as well? It is risk and performance throughout the organisation.
So in essence, there's a knowledge gap there to make that view.
Not so much a knowledge gap, it's just their assessment of the organisation from the piece of work they come in, and when they try and find out whether we've got embedded financial and embedded performance and embedded risk throughout the organisation, they're saying they can't find the evidence to say that it's up to the standard that they'd expect.
Thank you. Councillor Marcus.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just in terms of timescales, the non-financial performance and risk reporting, which is a fundamental plank of any governance of any organisation. When do you envisage those to be actually ready for report to council? I know you say quarterly reports, but getting a risk framework within the next couple of months is going to be challenging, I think.
I'll quickly respond and then hand over if Ashlyn wants to say any more. Obviously, the starting point will be in the next meeting that we have in terms of setting the corporate plan and the activity for the forthcoming 12 months. That should then tease out what those performance indicators, etc., will be, and we can start monitoring those during the forthcoming financial year. I would envisage that we will bring a first quarter report probably July/August, depending on the timing of meetings, from a position at the end of June. But the first point will be is to ensure that we agree in early March corporate plan and a sort of business activity for the year.
So just on the status of the corporate plan, I've been working with Councillor Marcus and Gemma Pender to put all the work you've done in kind of one place. There's some work we've done on vision and values, which you all need to approve. And then we put the priority actions for 18-19 against each strategic objective. And then we've also developed a corporate plan performance tracker, which takes all the outcomes, so X% of X delivered by when, from all the different objectives on a spreadsheet, which will report against and RAG rate. So therefore, you won't need to go through every single one at every meeting. You can decide to go for where we're performing really well or where there are risks. Each outcome has got a risk link. And I think the next step, once you're happy with the corporate plan, and then the corporate plan performance tracker, is setting up that risk management framework against the corporate plan. And that will be a piece of work, and I don't think will be done within the next couple of months. There is a piece of software that's been purchased so that we have consistency across the organisation in line with everything we're talking about here, which is that risk management needs to come from top down or either the other way, and that risk management is embedded at every single aspect of the organisation. So I think the risk bit is the next step. So let's take this really calmly. We've got corporate plan, we've got a way of measuring performance, which will coincide with quarterly budget monitoring. And then it's also then what's the framework for risk so that it's consistent and embedded.
Thank you. So we have two recommendations which I'd like to take both together, please. That members note the action plan to address the adverse value for money conclusion that the external auditor gave on its 2017-18 assessment, and that members approve the monitoring of this action plan being included in the proposed quarterly performance report. Proposed by Councillor Grottick, seconded by Councillor Mumford. All those in favour? Thank you. Unanimous. Right, we move on to item 10 on our agenda, which is a supplement paper, a financial report, again from Russell. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, you should all have the report in front of you. This is the fuller quarter end report. We take the lighter report in between, just on the budget monitoring. This is a more extensive finance report at the end of the third quarter. If we start going through it, I'll try and pick out the key points to get over to you and then open it up for questions. On terms of the revenue budget monitoring, I'm on the second page there, paragraph 2. As at the end of December for the financial year 2018-19, we are actually forecasting a net underspend of £64,000 for the year now. This is slightly up from what we've been reporting over the last 2 or 3 months, where the figure has been around the £45,000, £46,000 underspend. We have done some more extensive work with the budget managers to try and firm up more on the forecast, so we have more confidence in them. We still have an area of concern around the water and sewage service, which has a significant increase in expenditure, and we're doing some more detailed analysis at the moment to get to the bottom of that position. The graph sets out the variances on the top of the next page that show that the variances have been reasonably consistent through the year, so our forecasting is consistent, but the acid test will be what is the position at the end of March when we do the final accounts. My experience is usually the underspend increases at the end of the year, but we shall see whether that is the same result for the councils of Isles and Scilly. Going on, we then have split out the revenue budget by expenditure type. It comes to a slightly different total because there's some accounting entries which don't fit into these headings, but generally you'll see that the employees are underspending by about 150,000. A significant element of that is within Active Scilly, and you'll know that we are reviewing that in terms of taking potential savings next year, which will be the subject to the paper that we bring in March. We're slightly underspending on supplies and services. When I say slightly, 153,000, it is on a fairly significant spend, and offset slightly, but we're slightly behind on our income across the organisation compared with what we budgeted for. So overall, the sort of direct expenditure, if you take out some of the funny accounting entries that we have to put through, we're broadly in line with in total terms of what we're actually spending, but just slightly under on expenditure and slightly behind getting our income in. In terms of the next page, moving over, capital expenditure, this is the first time we've included this element of the report. If you remember, we set a consolidated capital programme at the end in December, so we are now putting monitoring in place. Obviously, that monitoring, now we've got the transparency, just throw up a couple of issues there, which I'll just cover. Obviously, the expenditure on the waste transfer station is higher than we had in the budget. Again, we'll do a piece of review on that to analyse exactly why, because I thought we'd have had the full cost at the end of November of that scheme, but there may be a late payment that's come through. And there's 2 items down the bottom where we've got residual expenditure from previous year schemes that we haven't actually budgeted for. But as you'll see, that we are significantly behind spending all the capital expenditure that we budgeted for. So we'll need to do an assessment of that and roll it forward if required into 19-20 for a spend, although it'll be against the 18-19 starts programme. But as I say, it's the first time we've put that there. I think we'll improve on that report as we go forward, but it at least gives members some transparency over capital spend now. Expenses for senior management are set out in section 5 as requested. I'm not going to dwell on those per se at the moment. If there's any questions either now or after the meeting, I'll try and answer them. Forecast savings, as you know, that we set up the risk of savings in the wheel of deliverability. In doing the budget setting in November, CLT reviewed the savings again, and we're in the same position as we were at the second quarter. We think about £136,000 of those £216,000 worth of savings will be delivered in the year. So we are only going to deliver 63% of the targeted savings. We will have rolled forward that into next year's budget setting, and the ones which aren't going to be deliverable, we've now taken out and found alternative solutions to balance the budget. In terms of the current year, obviously those non-delivery savings are being mitigated, as you can see in the bottom line, by managers in terms of managing overall expenditure within the budgets they have set. So although we're not delivered the savings per se as the savings plan set out at the beginning of the year, we have, with the senior managers managing within their budgets, mitigated that. Council tax collection is going quite well for the year. You'll see set out there in the graph on the following page that was slightly ahead of the target that has been set. So we anticipate that we will deliver the collection rate that we anticipated when we set the budget. It's looking good, and there will be a push in January and February to catch up. And I haven't got them to hand, but I have seen the January figures, and they are up slightly higher ahead of target. So that's looking good. Business rates, pretty much on target, just slightly behind. We've caught up since the last quarter where we were a little bit behind. If you remember, it was mainly because the council hadn't settled some of its own business rates. So we have now paid ourselves and got the account straight between the collection fund and the general fund. So that's improved performance there. What I probably should have touched on both council tax and business rates is that the council tax team have done a review of outstanding items, and we have written off 20 individual council tax items, all under 5,000, so they've been done under my delegation, but they're reported back here as part of that, part of this report. So 20 accounts written off, 38,700 in total. You can see the breakdown there between for the reasons, between deceased, insolvent, etc. I won't read them out. By far the largest element is old debt, and a lot of that is back around 2011, 2012, and to be honest, it should have been written off some time ago. It was never going to be collectible, but it was still on the books, so element of that is cleaning up from some time ago. The others have been chased to the fullness of our abilities, and either the person or the person owing the money is either insolvent, or there is a very good reason why we can't collect the money. Similarly, we've done the same on business rates, and you see that we've written off, a number of accounts written off is 8, and again, some of that is old, and some is down to insolvency. In terms of financial impact of those two, at the moment, until we get to the year end and do a full assessment, that they're comfortably within the provision that we have for bad debts. So I don't foresee that they'll have an impact on the bottom line, because we'd already provided 100% for those debts, because most of them are that old, or they already had a record that they were going to end up being written off, so they had been provided for. Water rates of collection, you see the performance there, that we've collected 78.28%, and we're just 3/4 of the way through the year, so that's performance is looking good at the moment, as is housing rent. I say we're 92.64% collection. Both will require a little bit of a push towards year end to bring those figures down, as we normally do, because both of them are slightly higher than we've started the year at. So we've, both the water and the housing have got slightly bigger arrears than we started. But speaking to the manager in this area, we feel that we will bring that back down by the year end. And the sundry debt position, we've got a current balance outstanding on sundry debt of 423,000. Of that, 236 is overdue. That is slightly down on what we started the year at. Here, what I have to say is that we did write off 4 small invoices during the year, a total of 1,200 for services. The person had passed away, and then the estate had been dealt with, so we weren't able to get any money. So the debt was actually written off. What I can say is, as a footnote, there was an issue with that estate for some reason, and it got reopened, and we got in there, and we've got the money now. But I need to report that we did actually write the debt off. The money coming back is a little bit of a sort of added bonus. Good action by the staff involved, who noticed that the activity had taken place, and we got in there pretty quickly and got the money, no problem at all. It was just before it had been dealt with, and we weren't able to put our claim in. Treasury management activity, there was no activity to report. We're still keeping within our prudential indicators that are set in the annual treasury strategy, but obviously we still have a need to borrow at some point when our working capital, if our working capital does reduce, because we haven't borrowed for externally for some time, and we have a borrowing requirement of some 5 million relating to historic capital programme. The reason we haven't is we've run down our cash balances at the moment. We will need to replenish those as we require that cash to be used to support funding elsewhere. I think I'll leave it there, Chair, and take any questions.
Thank you, Russell. Councillor Sims.
6.1, the savings. It's just this point, really. We obviously at 63%, but without wishing to be complacent, if we'd achieved 100% of savings, then we were probably under ambitious in our savings plan. So I think that's, I mean, obviously it could be better than that, but to have got basically 2/3 of the savings in, I think it's quite good given the situation we were in. So I just don't wish people to think, oh, we've underachieved there, because essentially if you have a under ambitious savings plan, you're not going to get anywhere. It's best to be a little bit over than under.
Yeah, and it also shows that the senior officers are managing their budgets. So they've identified that they're not delivering the savings, and they've identified alternatives to mitigate that within their spending areas.
Thank you. Councillor Marcus.
Sorry, just one question. Just for the housing rent collection, is that for general fund and social housing? Is that a whole lot together?
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Mumford.
Yeah, just a little bit of a puzzle. Expenses for senior managers. There only seems to be one person who's had expenses. I'm sure the chief executive did have some expenses. What happens there, Aisling or Russell?
It depends on how the expenses are claimed. The expenses there, as I said previously, those are expenses that have been claimed through the expense system, where officers incur the money themselves and then ask for reimbursement after they've incurred the expenditure. There's a way of doing that within the ERP system. Other officers who go may get the council to pre-book and pay for their expenses before they go, so they don't actually incur the expenses themselves. The council incurs it on their behalf, i.e. they ring ahead, book a hotel, either by their corporate purchase card or by invoice. So this is where the expenses is a little bit of a red herring, because it only picks up those expenses that
just
are
looks a bit
reimbursed
funny on
back to an
paper
officer.
that we only have one person who's claiming expenses.
Councillor Marcus.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about the water rates collection as well. I mean, compared to the other incomes, the NMDR and the council tax, it's quite a bit lower. Is there a reason for those targets not being higher?
There are a number of reasons. The considerable amount of business rates and council tax are collected on a 10-month period. People can elect to pay over 12 months, but there's still a significant number that still pay over 10, which obviously accelerates the payments. Water charges is similar, but there is as I led to believe, I asked the question myself, there's a far greater number of people who have elected to pay that over a 12-month period, so that's one of the reasons.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. Just going back to that section 5 on the expenses for senior managers, I think we discussed this before and said maybe there could be a bit of a review of how this works. It's not especially helpful at the moment. It doesn't give us a great oversight. So just sort of throw that in. A couple of questions really around the more specifics. And on Appendix A, obviously we've got a lot of variations. Is this really a hangover from the budget environments where everything was reclassified and it's sort of a bit hard actually to track what's going on from early in the year?
I'm not sure it's a hangover from the budget environments per se. I think it's a combination of things as we're going through the journey that we're on, in that I think it reflects in some instances the accuracy of some of the budgets that were set probably previously, because these budgets are pulled forward mainly on a historic basis. I think there's also there's a slight, almost a double whammy in the fact that we've got a lot more analysis and a lot more robust challenge around the way people are now coding costs as well. So we're getting costs better coded in the right place compared with previous years, but then we probably use previous years' analysis to help set the budget. So you're almost having a double whammy there in those terms. But there are some variances which are set out, which have proper reasons why we are actually have those variations from the budget. I mean, I've mentioned we need to do further analysis on water, etc. But there was significant third-party costs there because of the extra work last summer with the water shortage. So we're doing further work there. You've got the young people services where we know that we've got particular reasons there. They're set out that there's a reduction of services on CAMS, reduction in school improvement support, some vacancies around. So some of the variations are true variations. Some are probably triggered by accuracy of budgets and getting better accuracy on costs.
Crease is still ironing out to an extent.
Just to add to Russell's point, I mean, some of it is actually active budget monitoring and making efficiency savings in year and actively pursuing additional funding. So that's that young people services was actually managing to get more money from DFE, which is, unheard of currently. Redesigning services, so not cutting CAM services, redesigning emotional wellbeing services to address exactly the point that Lead Member for Children made earlier. So I think that's the thing that Russell was alluding to earlier. Well, while we didn't make the savings in the area we planned, senior managers worked together to come up with mitigating actions to get to an overarching balanced position. Mm-hmm. And I think that will always be the case.
Yeah, and my other question related to this was, and I've touched on this before, how much is this due to vacancy management? And I'd like to get an oversight really of where we are in terms of vacancies. What does that mean in terms of finances? What does it mean in terms of service delivery? Because I think we still haven't got a good handle on that. If we don't have staff and we save money, fine, okay, but how's that impacting our services? And I would push and say, could we have more of that information, please? I think that's quite central to understanding the budget and where we are.
Yeah, we'll take that on board and see as we develop the reports how we can get that weaved into the report.
Thank you. Councillor Grottick.
Thank you, Chair. I agree. I'd like to agree, and I think we flagged it several times before, that vacancy savings are actually a mixed blessing. But hopefully now we've had the management review and we're moving forward to have a look at the whole area. I think this is something obviously we'll be addressing again. And I'd just like to thank the active Silly staff who are actively trying to increase footfall all the time and increase the income and help the budget.
Thank you. Councillor Sims.
Regarding infrastructure and planning, it's my personal view of the airport, really. I mean, the airport has been, it's a fragile thing. And I think perhaps maybe governance is the wrong word. I think perhaps at some point, not for this meeting, we need to look at where the airport sits in the organisation. I'm aware that Newquay Airport is subsidised to quite a substantial degree by Cornwall. And having it as a standalone company is perhaps creates problems because the net value of the airport to the islands is enormous. And we're having this issue with getting enough money to cover the capital replacements and things. So I just think at some point, perhaps we should reassess the council and its relationship to the airport and its relationship to the council, and perhaps review where it sits within the organisation and perhaps incorporate it differently.
Chairman, if I can just briefly explain in terms of the airport budget, because I think as it's written, actually in the report, it's probably more stark than the reality. So the issue really with the airport is that, we were expecting or anticipating surplus income of about 288,000. But if you actually look at the report itself, we're probably closer to about a surplus of 160,000. Now, clearly, the issue for the airport, as Councillor Sims so rightly has said, is that we do need to think about the lifetime costs of the airport, and the important thing is actually keeping pace with the asset replacement plan, which is looking for about £8 million worth of investments over a 20-year period. So in terms of the operational costs, it is actually washing its face. It is making a surplus, albeit a modest surplus, but clearly it's just not hitting the kind of reserve targets that we should be looking at. And that is because, again, of passenger numbers. So we're anticipating this year about 94,000 passengers, whereas actually in the budget setting process last year, when we were looking at fees and charges, we were anticipating about 98,000 passengers. And clearly, there are costs associated with an airport. It is an expensive business. We have had some additional costs this year. So, you know, in terms of the budget setting process for the airport, these are things to be minded of when we meet next month. And likewise, in terms of the water and sewerage budget, you'll see that that is an amalgamation of both. And although, again, it looks quite stark, and the reality is that we've had some challenges this year, as members will know, particularly in terms of the water issues that we faced during the summer, which of course also extended into the autumn. If you actually look at the actual costs of the service income, there's actually a small surplus of around £38,000. Okay, so there's lots of, again, the expectation was that, and again, this comes back to the budget setting process, the expectation was that income or surplus income was going to be in the region of 300k, and that was to pay for various support services. So it's really important that we do actually set our budgets more realistically moving forward as well.
Thank you, Craig. Okay, we have a recommendation that members note the third quarter financial report as at the 31st of December 2018, including the forecast savings position and the debts written off. Could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Grottick, seconded by Councillor Barclay. All those in favour? Thank you. We'll move on to item 11 on our agenda, the revised housing allocations policy, page 35. Report of Nicola. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a short report, this, around the allocations policy, just to reflect some recent changes in statutory guidance. It relates to the inclusion of those suffering from domestic abuse, to now additional preference to be given to those that are suffering from abuse. It gives them a higher priority in the allocations policy. So we need to, the proposal is just to amend the policy according to the recent guidance. Just bearing in mind, this is a minor tweak for now, and later this year, part of our work programme is to have a wholesale review of our eligibility and allocations policy. But to keep ahead of the game and to make sure we're meeting current guidance, it's important to make this adjustment at this stage. So the recommendation is to make the revision set out Appendix 1, which is to include those suffering from domestic violence, evidence of case of domestic violence, into our current policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. Councillor Grottick.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very happy to propose that we accept this just to keep us legal, but I am surprised at number 5, and I have discussed it with Nicola before, that we're not allowed to take medical considerations. The medical considerations don't seem to have enough weight in our current policy. So I also warmly welcome the fact that we'll be looking at a more in-depth look at this whole area. Thank you. But for now, I'm very happy to propose the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Marcus.
Yeah, again, really happy to support this. We need to help and support victims of domestic abuse as much as we can. Just paragraph 2, just need to make sure there's consistency with the actual legislation. It's about, it mentions he there when it should be they in the legislation, so just need to make that thing. And the question, the housing policy, is that the one document that defines people's eligibility for housing? Is there no other, is there a...
Yeah, we just have a single policy at this stage. So eligibility and allocations are in that single policy that you have as part of your pack. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to make an observation on this. I think from central government, there's a fundamental flaw in this, in that, following on from what Councillor Grottick said, I'd just like to point out that many people suffer a medical condition which is ongoing and untreatable. In other words, they have to live the rest of their lives with it. Whereas safeguarding, by its very nature, is solvable by man. So I just think that more weight should be put on the medical side of things. I do understand that we're constrained here by government legislation, but I think it's flawed legislation.
Thank you, Nicola.
Just say it is something we can take account of, but I think it's part of that fundamental review that we'll do later in the year. That will involve some member workshops as well as tenant and community engagement. So it is on the agenda. We won't forget about it.
Thank you, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Just moving on to the actual policy on page 39. I just wanted to clarify, really, under section 1, there are several qualifying criteria. It doesn't seem to make clear to me, is this you have to meet one, some, or all of these conditions?
I'll just point out that this is the existing policy, as it stands and as it's written. It may need further clarity as we move forward, and the adjustment today is really on the page 41 of the pack, which is about the addition of the evidence of case of domestic violence or abuse.
Right.
I think there's an awful lot in the policy to review. And I think we'll need to spend some time doing that through workshops as well as through formal council.
That's encouraging to hear. Yeah, I think there is quite a lot to review. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Marcus.
I'll second the initial proposal for the recommendations.
Thank you. So we have that recommendation to approve the policy. All those in favour? Thank you. It's unanimous. Thank you, Nicola. So we move on to item number 12, the general fund account rent setting, again in your domain. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So this report relates to our general fund properties, and just to remind members, we've got 12 houses, 4 bungalows and 1 garage within our general fund. And these properties are used for statutory officers and for essential key workers within the council. Two of those properties, are held under secure tenancies, and their rental increases are controlled through the welfare bill, which will come on to item 13. So we don't have discretion to change the rental on those 2 properties. So you'll see in the recommendations that it's split between those that we have a say in what the rental increase should be and those that we don't. So the 2 properties that are under secure tenancies, we're obliged to do a 1% reduction for this last year, for this coming year, one of 4 years of reductions that we've had over the previous years. But the main debate here is around the remaining properties. So in years gone by, since 2015, we've been increasing the general fund rents by 4% per year. That's generally been accepted by most of the residents. It's not caused any problems. I think this year we've just started to see a little bit of a wobble in that rent increase. We've had 1 or 2 arrears, and we've had a property held void where the rent's been held too high. We couldn't find a tenant for it. So it's just starting to ring in my own mind a few alarm bells around the rate and pace of that rent increase. So I've left it for you members to decide this year what you think the rent increase should be. So normally we've said 4%. We could do 2%, which is CPI. We could do 3%. We could do 4%. I've got a number of scenarios into the report for you to consider. I think for the council as a whole, there's 2 things to consider: the impact on the council's budget and the impact on people's individual budgets. For the council, we need to make sure we can pay the maintenance bill, the management bill, the repairs bills. By and large, the general fund properties are in a better state than our social properties, and we have been able to put money into reserve from the general fund rents over the last couple of years. So we've then got to think about the affordability of those properties and the affordability ratios for our staff. So I've left you with that balance to make in this report. So we could go for 2%, which is CPI. We could go for 3% with CPI plus 1%, or we go for 4%. The total impact on the council budget is insignificant overall. So if you combine the general fund, all the general fund properties, if we increase them by 2%, our overall income to the council from those rentals would increase by £2,300. If we increased all those properties by 4%, it's about £4,700. So the range of 2 to 4% impacts the council budget by about just under £2,400, which is insignificant. I think we've got to balance that out against the impact it has on those individual tenants and whether that is too hard to bear if we take it to 4% at this stage. My concern this year was that we were just starting to get 1 or 2 voids and 1 or 2 rent arrears, which we hadn't seen before. So I present the case to you to have a look at whether you think 2%, 3% or 4% would be appropriate for those general fund properties. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. Any comment? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. It sounds to me like you're making a recommendation towards the lower end of the scale. A recommendation nonetheless. I mean, just to sort of, on paragraph 9, I was just reading that and thinking, well, actually, how serious is this? How many people we talk about that are being affected by these rent increases?
At the current time, we've got 1 person who is on a payment plan. So we've got into serious arrears on 1. There's usually arrears within the year and we'll catch up, but there's 1 on a repayment plan. And there's 1 property that's been held void for a period of time.
Right.
Thank you. Councillor Sims.
The issue with increasing rents, I think 4% for a number of years. Okay, first year it's 104, but if you index it back to the previous year, the second year it's 108, third year it's 112. So it actually gets, the burden gets disproportionately higher, which is perhaps hidden by the fact it's 4% a year. So I think it would seem sensible to reduce the 4% for a bit. The other thing we have an issue with over here is that the divergence between the private rental market and the social renting market is enormous. So that's something else you have to bear in mind. But I do think on the basis that rents have gone up by above inflation for a number of years, then the burden has become increasingly onerous, and we perhaps just cutting it back for 1 year, you can actually regulate it a little bit more. It becomes more sensible, i.e. the curve on the graph goes down essentially. So I haven't got a firm view on what we should do, but I think perhaps if we link it to inflation for this year, that would be useful.
Thank you. Nicola?
Just a quick point, really. I think at this point in time, we also don't know what our future repairs bill will be. And what's really important, both in this report and the coming report on social housing, is that stock conditions survey has currently been undertaken. And I think once we have that in hand, we'll have a much better idea of what our future proactive and reactive repairs programme will be and what that bill will look like. So I think moving forward into not this year, but the following year, the rent setting will become much more aligned to a business plan around that repair programme. So I'd want to see a 5-year business plan as well as a 30-year business plan set this time next year. So I think this year's the 1 year where there's a little bit of flexibility. I think next year there'll be a little bit more objectivity to the report.
Thank you. Councillor Marcus.
Yeah, this report's really difficult for me. I rent privately. I think I'm probably one of the only councillors looking around that actually does have a private rental here. So this is, yeah, lots of you've been there, but I think it's different now. I did my own research. House rentals in Cornwall in the last 2 years have gone up 8.5%. So that's the last 2 years private rental, new rents. So in that context, 3 and 4% rental increase doesn't look too unreasonable, really. But saying that, it's really hard to, when you're affecting people's lifestyles and take the living wage point in the report, that, you know, the maximum for the highest rent house is nearly 40 grand a year, which is not achievable for most people on the Isles of Scilly. This report, without knowing what the bills are going to be, is hard to set rates. So you're asking a kind of impossible question, really. I feel being put into a corner to answer this question. So we don't really know what the situation is. So what I would propose, and given there's no massive evidence for unaffordability at the moment, I would propose that we're generous with our tenants and choose option 1. I'd also like to propose that we have an investigation on how to make the housing model more equitable across the islands as a whole, including our social rents, even though that is out of our control at the moment. We are all tenants, all of the council tenants, whether they're social rent or general fund, are putting into the same pot for repairs. So I would like to see officers work towards something that's a bit more of an equitable model and sustainable model for the future generations on the Isles of Scilly. So I don't know what the words would be for that, but that's something I'd really like to see going forward.
Yeah, certainly one of the things we're setting up again is the Housing Task Force, and I think that's one of the things we'll be tackling as part of that work, particularly in relation to the new properties that will come on stream as part of our housing programme. So I think it's a critical issue to get right. So I think we'll come back with some options around affordability, what an affordable rent might look like for the islands. So that affordable equity is a difficult one when we've got social rents going down and private rents going up. Next year we'll be in a different position where for the social rents we will for the first time in 4 years be able to set our own rents. And so I think we'll be able to influence that more as we move forward. So we'll pick that up as part of the Housing Task Force, but also as part of those discussions with members around housing issues, eligibility, allocations, and within that is a debate about affordability. So we'll pick that up as we move forward this year.
That's great. Yeah, and some sort of timeline for that would be brilliant. Just in terms of equity as well, just on the table on page 49, one of the houses is named when it shouldn't really, when the others aren't. That seems a bit unfair, really.
Thank you. Councillor Sims.
Given that the absolute figure involved here, which is £4,000, £2,000, is pretty insubstantial compared to the overall budget. And given what I said previously, I would like to propose option 1, which is the lower, I believe. No, well, in that case, I would second Councillor Marcus. I should listen to him more.
Thank you. We've had a proposer, Councillor Marcus, and seconded by Councillor Sims for option 1. All those in favour? Thank you. It's unanimous. So to take the recommendations, we're approving, please, the proposed 1% reduction for Category 1 property rents 2019-20, and we are determining option 1 for the Category 2 and 3 properties. So could I have a...
And Chairman, I'd also like to add that recommendation about future affordability or equity in the housing, the council-owned housing stock.
Thank you.
Research into that to be brought back to members within a year.
So could I have a proposer for the whole of recommendation 1, as I've stated, please? And seconder, that's Councillor Smith, seconder, Councillor Mumford. All those in favour? It's unanimous. Thank you. So we come to item 13, which is the social housing account rent setting. Again, Nicola, thank you. Page 53.
Yeah, similar report to last year's and the year before and the year before that. This is established through the Welfare Reform and Work Act in 2016 and amended regulations that required us to reduce the rents by 1% year on year. This is the final year of that requirement, so our hands are tied. So with the recommendations are to decrease the rents by 1%. We are proposing to change service charges this year. We've managed to do that within a no increase proposal because of the fuel costs haven't increased significantly, and the garage rents are increased in line with the consumer price index, which is 2%. So the recommendations are with you on page 53, and we'll come back with a different report next year.
Thank you, Nicola. Councillor Mumford.
Yes, could I just ask one question, please? This is on page 54, paragraph 4. Could you explain to me what the service charge elements are?
So some properties, some flatter properties are on a district heating system, a shared heating system, and that's included within their service charges.
And that's just those properties with shared heating?
I think there's 1 or 2 that have got shared cleaning facilities as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sims.
Oh, well, I'd be very happy to propose all three of these, though it would be nice if we could vote against one. It means nothing, though, but it just seems somewhat irksome that every year we have to approve something we don't approve of, because that's the rules. And next year we can perhaps look at this properly, because it does come back to this issue of increasingly diverging private rents and social rents. And obviously the government put this in a long time ago to throw a bone to their electorate, really, at the cost of local councils, which I think that's possibly the only instance of the government doing that.
Thank you. Councillor Marcus.
Yeah, just agree with Steve there. I mean, if you use the living wage calculations, the most expensive property, you need to earn 13 grand to afford to live in that, which means in effect the council is subsidising businesses and across the island through this. Well, all council taxpayers are doing that. So yeah, it's frustrating and it's inequitable, and you can have two people living next door to each other paying wildly different rents. So but again, I would second the proposals.
Thank you. So we've got the recommendations that members approve a decrease of 1% in the annual rents for the property held within the social housing portfolio, 105 properties, no change to the service charge elements on these properties, and that garage rents are increased in line with the Consumer Price Index, December 2018, of 2%. I have a proposer, Councillor Sims. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Mumford. All those in favour? Thank you. It's unanimous. So the part 2 reports are for information only. So at this point, I would like to close the meeting and move into part 3, the exemption of the exclusion of the press and public. Thank you.